Hester, thanks for giving me some time today to talk about something that's really important for a lot of our clients, moving their training from classroom to a virtual environment. And of course, there already were trends that people were going in the direction of e-learning and virtual work. But now, of course, we're all working from home. Even where people are going back into work, they still have co-workers that are working, teleworking and working from home. And I think also another driver of all this is the options, the technology options that we see coming along that allow us to control costs and still connect with people and share the trainings. So I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure. These are strange days, and I think even after, people will be wanting to work from home and have that flexibility. So I think it'll be tough to go back to the way things were.
Yeah, so maybe what we could start out with is to talk about what is similar about classroom and virtual, and then maybe we can get down the road into what are some of the things that are different. But let's start with, what's similar.
Yeah, I think the most obvious one is the people, right? If we're doing training with our clients, whether they're on the computer or in person, it's people are the same. And as adults, we very much want it to be interesting, relevant, practical, usable back at work. And as adults, we also want to be able to make connections to what we already know. So that part for me is just the first off, right? It's the same people. And so when I think about classroom training design, I'm thinking about how do we get people using information in different ways. There's that reflection time where people have a chance to think, discussion time, moving around the room, how do we get people engaged in different ways? How many breaks do people need? That's very similar as well in the virtual environment, right? The different engagement options and interactions and how many breaks people need. Yeah, so those two things jump out right away for me as what the similarities are.
And definitely, I think those are really good points. Definitely, we would also be thinking about the fact that the way we approach the training design using the ADDIE model is certainly similar. And through that process of collecting the data and doing the design, those pieces that you're talking about, would really come out as far as what's the curriculum, how long are the segments, how many breaks, but certainly an ADDIE model and also Kirkpatrick on the evaluations. Certainly those are some similar pieces as well.
Yeah.
I have this slide that I thought might be helpful to people. It is based upon research that's been done a number of years ago by Deloitte. And I think it's still relevant today because it was already tracking the trends that we were seeing in moving from classroom to virtual, self-paced. But it's all about what they were calling the modern learner. And there's a couple of points that I'd like to just call out from the slide. And I think as we think about virtual training, we're also hearing, and you and I have talked about this before, the Zoom fatigue, the COVID brain, what people are mentally exhausting themselves with as we look at video. And so I think we have to kind of keep those things in mind as well. But one of the things that came out of the research by Deloitte was at that time, 30% of the employees were really conducting their work somewhere other than their work location. And now we know, of course, with everybody being sheltered at home or really now making the choice, I would rather work from home, that number, of course, is much larger than it was a few years ago. But we were also seeing at that time that employees really wanted to do the training at their own pace, at their own time. Put it somewhere that when I have some time, I could go in, log in, do whatever pieces I can, and then come back to finish it. And certainly what we have learned, you've mentioned we work with principals for adult learners. Certainly what we're seeing and what they saw uh, through this research at that time, 80% of the workforce was really saying, here's the way I learn. I learn when I'm working with my peers. I'm learning when I work with my manager and I'm on the job. It's really relevant there. So I think really thinking about these particular trends and how they relate not only to what we do in the classroom, but how do we make it relevant when we're doing it virtually is really important. And I guess the piece that was the most shocking for me was to see that about 1% of a typical work week is available for employees to even think about training. And that's such a small amount of time. So, the shorts, the micro learnings, ways that we can engage with people, even through podcasts or, voice over PowerPoint, some ways to make it short where they can get what they need and move on. I think all of these things are really relevant as we think about moving people from classroom to virtual.
Yeah, the piece about podcasts, I'm a huge fan of the podcasts, and I'll devour them when I'm doing dishes or whatever. And I think if we can connect people with these small micro learnings, I love that phrase because it's so descriptive, right? Give me a 20-minute podcast, 4-minute video, give me a little article or blurb, like you have a headline to catch people's interest. I scroll through the news and I'm like, oh, that's an interesting headline, but I'm not clicking on it. So how do we capture people's attention very quickly? Whether we use it as pre-work, post-work, or part of this micro learning curriculum, offering people in chunks so that they can do it that way.
Yeah, great. So Hester, maybe you could talk a little bit about the platforms. That is one of the big differences when we go from classroom to virtual. How are we presenting that and getting people to use technologies?
Yeah, so based on our experiences over the past couple of weeks, there are a number of choices out there. Some of them are very intuitive and easy to pick up. So if a client hasn't been using it, some of those are really easy. Others with some more advanced features, they might take a little bit more time for the client to learn and get comfortable with and familiar with. So I think the conversation with the client about what's their culture, right? Are they using meeting software that they're already comfortable with? Are they using their cameras on meetings? Because when you're doing virtual training, I know as an instructor or facilitator, it feels a lot sometimes like I'm talking to myself. I'm alone in my room. And so if I can see people's faces, it makes it more interesting for me. And I think for the learner as well, they're able to see and engage with other people. And I think finding out how the client works is really key, and being able to test software with them before you get into the learning page, the learning place is really key. And then depending on the features that you need, I think every 2 to 3 minutes you should be doing something engaging or interactive for the learner. So, little lecturettes from me is about how long I like to talk, 2 to 3 minutes. And then, what are you guys thinking? What connections are you making? Using the chat box, polls, small group sessions, breakout sessions, or having people unmute themselves and talk, and then the other piece I think that's really different as a facilitator and probably adds to the Zoom fatigue is this digital body language that we keep hearing about. And so when you're facilitating a classroom or you're a learner in a classroom, you're reading body language. It's a little bit different and a little bit more difficult. And so I think if you can have a software platform that helps you do do that, make that easy for people, whether they're seeing the chat or the faces, that kind of stuff. So I think working with the client is really key in order to make sure that you're finding the right tool that they're going to be using.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, one of the challenges that we've seen as we've been doing virtual trainings, especially with people working from their home networks, is that bandwidth. And, what, are those instructions that we might have to give to the learners ahead of connecting, so they know to turn off a variety of other things they might be having playing in the background. But when you've got learners at home who are also home with their children who are schooling, and maybe another partner or someone else in the household who is also working and using the internet, all of a sudden the bandwidth may become an issue, and features on their particular computers, what they have and what they don't have. I think it's really important as far as giving them an opportunity to practice ahead of time. As you were saying, maybe people will turn their cameras on, or maybe they won't, but if they don't even know how to turn their camera on, they need a chance to play with it first.
Yeah, and it's different for each platform too, training platform that we use, right? I think in a couple of them it's very intuitive, and the others I find I have to go in and change the resolution of my video in order to get it to be seen. So yeah, and I think there are some behind the scenes things like these backups and syncs. I think of myself as fairly competent on computers, and it still takes me a while to figure out what is going on in the background and how do I turn it all off so that I have as much bandwidth for video as possible. So yeah, being able to give people those quick tips can be really helpful.
Yeah, so you were talking about some of the features that some of these platforms have, and I think that one of the other important pieces for us to talk about is the fact that industry standard is saying, you were talking about, I want people to be engaged in doing something every couple of minutes, but industry standard is saying, don't even go beyond 60 minutes or 90 minutes if you have to really stretch it. How do you as a facilitator handle those kinds of time frames when you've got more content that you have to share?
Yeah, so we have done 2 hours. It has been a norm. We haven't done anything shorter or longer, and I think we may have to do that. I think getting everybody together is a real challenge for every client we've talked to, right? How much time can we get with people? And so I think 2 hours works. Something that we've played around with is giving a little bit of pre-work. I think 30 minutes seems to be about average, maybe a little bit longer, depending on if it was going to be an 8-hour in-person course. Cannot do 8 hours on video. I know I can't, just as a person watching, 2 hours is like a movie length. That's about how much time I can sit and look. So how do you break that up into pre-work, post-work? Are you asking the teams to do work, that you might have done as a group together? Can you do that elsewhere? So I think with the 2 hours, you want to do 10 to 15-minute break about halfway through. And I think what's really powerful about the pre-work is people come in having thought about it. And so you don't have as much dead time asking people to reflect and answer questions. They've come in with that. And then the conversations have been really very interesting. I think for the participants as well as for me, because I don't always know exactly what jobs are that they're doing. I know the theories, I have experience in a couple of different industries, but they can make it more real and meaningful for them. And so the more that I can get them engaged in conversation, I think the better. So yeah, I would say 2-hour chunks. We've done 2 hours in the morning with a couple of hours off, and 2 hours in the afternoon for those 8-hour courses that we've converted. That seems to work pretty well, and I think it gives people a chance to get up, walk around, answer email, that kind of thing. So that seems to be working pretty well for us. The other thing that we are we've talked a lot about is doing one meeting a week for a couple of weeks, so people have a chance to let it percolate, and think about, and then, as you start to notice, like one of the trainings we do is behaviors and how we interact with each other in our team, you start to notice those behaviors and you notice, is this helpful or not? And if it's not, what do I maybe want to try differently? And then they're coming back into the workshop, having paid more attention to that interaction. So that's how we've been trying to structure it. And it seems to be working pretty well, I think, for the participants as well.
Yeah, I like that idea where we do give them that break. I think that what we're seeing is from their opportunity to practice in that week, that between sessions, gives them the opportunity to maybe even empower each other of, this is working for me, but this part isn't. How are you handling that? As they have some post work with their teammates. And so I think we do have to shift our thinking in the design, as you were saying, of not only the chunks of time, but an earlier reference you made is maybe they have something to read, maybe they have some type of exercise, maybe they have somewhere they have to do some demonstration with a supervisor or a manager to demonstrate that they are picking up and using the new behaviors that are being modeled.
Yeah, and not being in person, I think we sometimes get intact teams and we sometimes don't. So giving those discussion topics to say, what are our norms? What do we want our norms to be? Because we don't often do that at work, stop and talk about how do we want to work together. And so it just kind of evolves organically. And sometimes it works really well for us, and sometimes it enables us to avoid these honest conversations that I think are really important. And so how do we create a discussion that the team can then go and have afterwards in a way that they can facilitate themselves, have a really good conversation about how do we want to work together. We don't hold each other accountable, and so we're dropping the ball here and we're missing the mark. And so how do we want to hold each other accountable? Maybe for me, it's like, yeah, pull me aside. I don't want that public. Or maybe it's at the group level. Like, how do we talk about this so that we can better support each other? And I think that piece can be really valuable, and it's hard to do in a 2-hour session,
Yeah. So I think that part of what's coming up for me from this conversation is the fact that how responsible and accountable as a learner I need to be, because it is a little different than going in the classroom and I'm kind of putting it all on the facilitator to like, okay, transfer it all. But now I've got a role of maybe a little bit more activity that I need to do in order to bring all these pieces together. And so I know that we talked about putting together like the house rules of, this is what goes on. Usually in a classroom setting, we start with expectations. There's a flip chart of the ground rules, those kinds of things. And so in this virtual environment, one of the things that we're learning is maybe we need some house rules of what's your background? What do you see? Is it too personal? Are people even paying attention to those kinds of things? I'm wondering, as you think back over the virtual trainings that you've been doing these past couple of months, what are some of the challenges that you as a facilitator have had to think about and work through, some of these like on the spot, that as we continue to modify and adapt our processes, we need to keep at the forefront of when we're working with our clients?
Yeah, I think the compassion for the client and for all working from home, everybody's got kids or pets or somebody else using the internet. And so as a norm, I like to say, please turn on your videos. We understand everyone's working from home, so do what you need to do. because everybody's adults. If you need to go to the restroom and it's not break time, go to the restroom, just put a little away message, or, and some of these platforms have stepping away for a moment. That's fine. Even in in-person classrooms, do what you need to do. If you have an emergency call, that's fine. So I think offering that to the participants is really powerful, because you don't know, what their circumstances are. Kids are sick, or, spouses are sick. So I think that piece is very key. And they've also been very compassionate and graceful with me if that happens. I had I have headphones that are battery charged, and I really like them, and they died in the middle or towards the end of a training program. And so, having a co-facilitator and a producer be very comfortable stepping in, went and grabbed my wired ones, got them set up. But these things happen, whereas in person, I'm not going to, there's nothing that I'm using in that way. Maybe a microphone if it's a large classroom. So I think that kind of thing, knowing things will happen, rolling with it, keeping going, and then offering the same grace to the participants is really helpful. It makes it feel a little less classroom, right? I think a lot of people have an aversion to teacher and student, and it just isn't my style with teaching. I think we are learning together, because I always walk away with some new information. It's partly why I love the job. So I think that piece for me comes, and then offering as much support in the technology as possible. We're not there troubleshooting, but here are the pre-tips. Here's some of the features to, use if you need to chat or whatever goes on. So being able to offer people a quick orientation, maybe longer if it's more complicated software. Those are the things that come up for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, rounding this conversation out, are there any other tips that you think are important for clients to be thinking about when they move, from classroom to video?
Yeah, I think the time it takes to adapt, right? So, if we've done an 8-hour in-person class with a client and they want the training again, but it has to be virtual now, I think some parts that's really difficult to understand is how much time it takes to translate that. How are we chunking it up? What can we give as pre-work or post-work? Maybe do we prioritize some things and have to cut some things out? And that's been very hard for a couple of our clients. They're like, what's important? They're like, it all is. Okay, if you had to rank them, well, they're all important. And so, okay, here's the agenda. If we do everything in 2 hours or 4 hours, there's 5 minutes per topic. And they're like, okay. And so helping them to understand that there's less time. And the ownership piece that you were talking about, I think, is just so key, because if we're asking them to do pre-work, how many of them are actually going to do it? Yeah. And post-work, that follow-up, how do we make it interesting at that point so that they are kind of rounding out their thoughts? So I think being able to help whoever our primary client is that we're working with on translating the training, helping them see that there is some time and funding needed to translate that training in order to make it good. Because I know you very much care about giving the learner a good experience, and I'm with you on that. And that takes some time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just helping them see all of the thoughts that go into this. We've been having this conversation for months about how to do that. How do we help people see that? Because they're like, well, we want the training. It's already built. Yes, and
right.
Different platform.
Yeah, well, I've really enjoyed the conversation today. I think with this last slide, just putting up some of the ideas that have percolated from this conversation and from the one that we've been having for a while now, but 7 points are coming up for me, and right there at the top of the list is, classroom doesn't equal virtual. And there's a lot of different virtuals. There's, it could be PowerPoint, with voiceover. It could be that they can do by themselves, putting it on an LMS. But where you need to have people in a team, can it be more than just a webinar where we're talking at people, and make it more engaging through some of these platforms to have it be a little bit more motivating to move their behaviors. But also, I think you've shared a lot about the importance of selecting the right platform. And it's not exactly a meeting platform does not equal a training platform. And even if you can't afford, or your firewall is too intense, that you can use a feature like Zoom, where there's many features. Being able to do something in the design of how you engage people, so that they are able to participate on that platform. And then giving them, and I think this is one of the biggest lessons that we've learned, making sure that those learners have got the time and the tutorials to get up to speed on, where are my buttons and how do I get in here, and do I mute myself or are they going to mute me? Working through all that, and definitely encouraging the learners. This may be a new environment for them. Go ahead and practice with your camera. Maybe we even suggest they get their own personal accounts and be able to do a call or a connection with their families, so that they get comfortable in that kind of space. But I think also encouraging them to be present. I think in the classroom, we're right there with them. It's very easy to walk up to somebody and they feel your presence, so they feel like, I better participate. Or you can call on them when you see a particular expression that they're lost or confused about something. As you've mentioned, we really need them to be accountable, to be present and participate there, because we may not, if there's 30 people on the virtual training, we may not be able to see every single person or be monitoring, what they're looking, what their expressions are, where they're looking for some additional help.
Yeah.
And I think,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the accountability piece, I don't want to do that work for them. I don't want to mother them or teacher them, and so if they want to be there, we will have a great conversation. I'll share what I know, you share what you know, but we can't do it for them. And I think that's true in class as well as online, maybe especially online. And so I think that piece, we can't do it for them, but what we can do is make it interesting and relevant, fun. That's always my hope, is that we've had a couple of laughs and that kind of thing. But that ownership piece, yeah, that's really on them.
Yeah, and I think another point here, we didn't really maybe touch on this too much in our conversation, but the research is showing that providing notes, note-taking handouts, so that there are some places for them to write down what it is they're experiencing. That connection from our brain to our hand really does help with the retention of the materials. And so I think that that's another thing that's probably a little bit different than the classroom experience, but really important for virtual work. And then I think you talked about this, and I think a very important point about how do we make that post connection after the training, especially if they are working in a cohort or they're on a team. How can they continue to support each other and empower each other with what they're learning and what they're practicing? And I think that that goes on to also strengthen team building. I think as we think about people working more and more virtually, that opportunity build those relationships becomes harder and harder because we're not in person with each other with that kind of human touch. And so being able to continue to promote that kind of conversation develops the team as well as the trust that they need, for working together. And I think, just like in classroom, it's just as important to do those evaluations after each of the sessions, see what's working, see where people had issues, what could be modified, making those adaptations as we go along. And certainly as we've seen the market and the technologies for online learning exploding, we are going to see more and more advancements in how we are going to use these tools. And so I think it's really important not only for us as consultants, but also for our clients to stay up to date on what's coming down the road.
Yeah, and there's something fun about seeing what other people are trying and what's working for them, because there are things that I haven't thought of that other people have. So that part is just really interesting for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for your time today, Hester. I think this would be very helpful for people.
Yeah, it's really good to see you.
Okay, good to see you too.
Okay.
Bye.